Like I said, I was born here. My parents came over after the war. My father came over, I think, in 1949, 1950. My mother came over in 1950, 51, about a year or so later. I was born here in 55, and I was raised Catholic. The school right across the street from me, St. Mary's School, is where I went. I also went to St. Mary's Catholic Church just down the road, and I was an altar boy. And I can say I was always very religious. I can sincerely say that in all my life, there was not a single moment where I did not believe in God. I knew it like I knew my own name. And so I took it very seriously. Even as a little kid, I took it very seriously. I wanted to be a good religious person. I wanted to be a good Catholic. So I always had lots of questions, and I always was analyzing a lot of things that a lot of my friends just really wasn't of interest to them. And like you mentioned, there were a lot of problems that came up. Now, when you're a little kid, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, nothing makes sense. So you're used to being confused, and you're used to not knowing. But there were certain things that I found problematic. For example, we were taught that the only way to get to heaven, the only way to get to God, was through Jesus. And this doesn't, even as a young kid, this didn't make sense to me, because if anyone knew people, it would be God who created us. And people just don't all agree on one thing. And the alternative, going to hell and burning in hell forever, it seemed, it didn't make sense. And this one way to get to God through Jesus and eternal damnation, burning forever for the sins of a lifetime, it didn't seem right. It didn't seem fair. And I was asking, not because I was a smart aleck, I wanted to understand. And I had an appointment with our parish priest. We were very lucky. We had Monsignor Ferrando, a Jesuit, very intelligent man. And so I made an appointment in the rectory to see him, and he answered my questions, but his answers were way above my head. I must have been about 9 or 10 years old at the time, and he gave me like an adult answer. And he just lost me. He had an answer, I just couldn't understand it. About the time that most kids leave, religious life, 12, 13, 14 years old, at the time you go to high school, I stopped going to church. I was still a Catholic, I just didn't go to church. Later on, I became a born-again Christian. Now, for those of you who don't understand Christianity, a born-again evangelical fundamentalist Christian is a different kind of Christian than a Catholic. Born-agains fall into the Protestant branch of Christianity, and the Catholics are the Catholic branch. So the conversion experience was extremely powerful, and I figured, oh, finally I get it. Finally I understand what it is to be a good Christian. Once the euphoria died down, these questions still remained. Eternal damnation, only one way to get to heaven, only one way to get to God, at virgin birth. So I went to wasn't the priest, it was a reverend, pastor, whatever. I made an appointment with him, and I put the same questions to him. I started off with my friends, and I realized, these guys are not theologians. They didn't have any religious theory. So, but I figured, okay, well, the reverend must. I mean, he became a pastor or whatever they call him. And so I put these to him, and he told me exactly what my friends told me. You need to pray more, and the Holy Spirit will give you the answer. And I'm thinking, well, tell you what, why don't you just give me the answer? And anyways, I was very dissatisfied and very disillusioned. And eventually my Christianity left me. I was still believed in God, but I no longer believed in Jesus. And to a lot of my born again friends, they found that very hard to understand, because to them, Jesus is God. And so, well, if you believe in God, you believe in Jesus. Anyway, I was living in Toronto, living downtown, and I started reading things about, well, I was reading about everything. just did a lot of reading. And because I was interested in religion, I read a lot about religion. I started reading things about Judaism. And at this time, I'd pretty well made up in my mind what things were like. There was God, and he tells us what to do. And if we do it, things go well. And if not, they don't. And when I started reading about Judaism, to my shock and to my surprise, this is already what I had figured out was the way it went. So I was the most surprised guy in the world. So it wasn't a situation where I changed my beliefs and went to another religion. I stumbled across the fact that there was already a religion that I believed in. I just didn't know it. I converted first through the conservative movement at Ventresca. And then during my conversion process, because I was brand new, everything I learned about Judaism was from reading. It's like learning how to drive only by reading, the driver's manual. I never had any practical experience. And during my conversion with the conservative movement, I realized about conservative, Orthodox, and Reform. So by the time I had completed the conversion process, I figured, okay, well, I've got to convert Orthodox, which I did. At the time, there was a Bezdin at the Toronto Jewish Congress, Rabbi Steinberg, and I went to him, and over the course of about a year, converted with him. I got married, had kids, got divorced, and my daughter, 7, 8 years ago, made Aliyah. She now lives in Ashdod, married, has kids. And I got to thinking, if I were to make Aliyah, or even if I had to prove that I was Jewish, I couldn't, because all of the paperwork from my Orthodox conversion with Rabbi Steinberg was lost. And all the witnesses were dead. I went back to the Toronto Jewish Congress, and their files were, nothing was there. And so I said, what am I going to do now? So a friend of mine said, okay, go to the Toronto Bezdin, contact Rabbi Vail. And I found out that the Bezdin at Toronto Jewish Congress, because it was kind of like this renegade Bezdin. And so I went to Rabbi Vail, explained the situation to him. And he wasn't all that enthusiastic. So I kept emailing him and and eventually he got me in a meeting before the Toronto Bezdin, Rabbi Siag, Rabbi Shoikit, and the name escapes me in a minute, Rabbi Lowy. And so I went through the conversion process with them. And after having met me, they said, this is going to be on an expedited basis here. So I understand these days a conversion with the Toronto Bezdin is not uncommon to take 2 years. From the time I met the Bezdin to the time I was converted was like 6 months, just a little less than 6 months, which is unheard of for an Orthodox conversion these days. So that's how I got the 3 conversions. And so I was very interested, because I came from a Christian and a born-again background. I was very interested in the efforts by Christian missionaries to try to convert Jews. And in my research and in my running around, I met Julius Sis with Jews for Judaism. Then I met Rabbi Skobach, and I got involved. And they were very, very nice to me, very kind. At this point, I was coming into Toronto, as I still do, well, until the virus, every Shabbos and every Yom Tov. I live in the Niagara Peninsula, and every Shabbos, every Yom Tov, Friday afternoon, I'll go up. Some friends have been very kind with me. They put me up. And that's been going on for many years. And so I started doing videos for YouTube. If you go to YouTube and you put in my name, Daniel Ventresca, you'll see my YouTube channel. I have done at this point, I think, 860, 870 videos so far. I'm coming up on 900 videos about various religious topics. I do between 5 and 9 videos every week I post. And And Julius says, well, if you're doing videos, why don't you do some videos with us? And so I started doing videos for Julius. So if you go to Jews for Judaism Canada on YouTube and punch in my name, you'll see all the videos that I did for Julius and Rabbi Skobach. And on this past Christmas Eve, Rabbi Skobach and I we did a mock debate between a Christian missionary. I played the Christian missionary, and Rabbi Skobach presented the Jewish side, and we had a simulated debate. This wasn't the first time we've done this. This is like the second or third time we've done it. It was very interesting, very entertaining, and I hope informative. Some people, I think, were a little disappointed that it wasn't more like, a slam bang fight. It's not the purpose. The purpose was to use it as an educational tool, to teach people some of the arguments and some of the counter arguments and why they believe this and why we don't believe that. But and I've been doing that ever since. That's pretty well it.
So tell me a little bit about, if we could back up to your sort of childhood. What was you just said sort of that you were always a religious person, you always believed in God. What was your upbringing you mentioned you were an altar boy. Was this really sort of a culturally Catholic upbringing that you had? In other words, your parents were traditional Catholics, in other words, the equivalent of a traditional Jew? Or were they really sort of like, people who really took, sort of their Catholic faith very seriously? Yeah, help us understand that a little bit.
I was sent to Catholic school, so from kindergarten until grade 8. In addition to the regular classes, we were taught religion. We were taught Catholic theology. We were taught by nuns and priests, and also lay teachers as well. And so in terms of religion, it wasn't a cultural thing, it was religion. My family has, like many rural, rustic, peasant-type Italians, have a healthy skepticism when it came to the Catholic Church. Not when it comes to God or Jesus, but the institution of the church. They were a little skeptical. So they weren't religious in that way in their daily life. They went to church and that sort of thing, but they weren't. It's not that they weren't devout. They took the institution of the Catholic hierarchy, the priesthood, the papacy, the Vatican with a grain of salt, which is in retrospect was kind of healthy too.
And so, and when you really started to break away from, as you described in the beginning, the questions that arose for you were one of sort of, how is it that sort of, how can we connect to God if there's, so to speak, an intermediary? But help us understand that, because on one hand, you went from that to sort of evangelical Christianity. How does that thinking work? I'm sort of trying to piece that together, because if I'm thinking, I have this issue or this block about Catholicism, how did you then pivot to sort of a different form of Christianity?
To understand the Roman Catholic Church, especially as it was in the early 60s before Vatican II, it was very much like a corporate institution. There was a hierarchy. It was almost like a military. There was a chain of command, and there was a lot of rules. And things were very formal and rigid is perhaps too hard a word, but there was a definite structure, which a lot of people find comforting. And there were certain ages you had to go through certain sacraments, like in confession and communion, and everyone went through baptism when they were little kids. And it's not that I had a problem with it. It's just that when it comes to the more theological things, when it comes to concepts of God and sin and punishment and things that are more theological as opposed to structural, I found it lacking. So, like I said before, eternal damnation, which is part of all Christianity. Not just Catholicism, all Catholics believe in it. And again, and the one way to God. Now, when I started getting involved with the born again movement, The Protestant church doesn't, the various many denominations of the Protestant church, they don't have as rigid a structure. It's not a pope and things like that. Each individual church has its reverend or pastor, but as a giant hierarchy, that wasn't there. And also, the church was an intermediary between person and God or Jesus. And with a born-again philosophy, you had more of a direct contact with God and direct contact with Jesus. You didn't need the church to get to Jesus. It was good in terms of a communal relationship and hanging out with other Christians and that sort of stuff, but it wasn't nearly as rigid, which was very liberating. But when it came right to the theology, still hit a brick wall. It was very lively. It was very energetic. It had an energy that I found somewhat lacking in Catholicism. But yeah, it was looser and more enjoyable in a social way and in a surface way. But again, when it got to the theology, just like with Catholicism, it broke down. I was looking for answers. Now, Monsignor Frando, he had answers. I just didn't understand them. The Reverend at the church, he didn't even have answers, or at least he didn't have any answers for me, which I found very puzzling. I mean, I can't be the first person in 2,000 years to come up with these questions. I'm sure they must have been addressed at, Christian college or something like that. He should have given me something, but he gave me nothing.
And so what were the answers after this second change of yours? See what I did there. How did you, now that you were sort of in the evangelical movement or in that, how long were you in that movement for? Let's ask that.
A couple of years, 2-3 years.
And so in that period, how long did it take for these sort of the same questions about the eternal state of the soul to come back to you?
Fairly early, a couple of months. For those of you who've never, I imagine none of you have had it, who've gone through a born-again experience, it is extremely powerful, and you are on a high for quite some time, and this euphoria is bolstered up by your new born-again friends. And so it took a little while for that to come down and to get like normal. And when that came down, I said, okay, well, now that I'm in this, let's see if I can get some answers that I never had. So it was a couple of months. I first started asking my friends. That didn't work out. And then I tried to figure it out on my own. That didn't work out. And then I tried to ask the Reverend. That didn't work out. And then after a while, it just started eventually to peter out. There was no definite cutoff. It just kind of like died of starvation.
And so what were the answers that you were given when you sought sort of counsel and clarity from your peers and from members of the clergy?
Well, some people thought eternal damnation was a really good idea. And they were almost disappointed at the concept that there wasn't eternal damnation. I said, what are you talking about? And I kept saying, do you have any idea how long forever is? Like 900 million years times 950 million years times 970 billion years, 980 trillion times. You're not even scratching the surface. For the sins of a lifetime, that's not a God, that's a monster. And they says, well then if there's no hell, then what's the point? To which I would counter, if you're doing this not because it's true, but to avoid going to hell, my personal opinion, that's for the wrong reason. You should be doing it because it's true. You should be doing it because it's the way to serve God, not because you want to get out of hell. It was very frustrating. And I kept trying different people, but I got more or less the same answer.
So what made you then, so was it, so to speak, this concern that it bothered you so deeply, or was that this was incompatible with a free will and a loving God, so to speak?
Well, it was incompatible with the idea of a fair and loving God. If you look through the Tanakh, God may not always be a nice guy, but he's generally fair. And it generally makes sense to certain things. It don't make sense, but as a general rule, it's fair. And it didn't seem fair. It didn't seem godly that he would punish people eternally for the sins of a lifetime. It didn't seem godly and smart that he allowed only one way to get to him. There's I don't know how many billions of people there are in the world. Not everyone's going to grant everything. And to have something as important as, your eternal salvation hinging on the one way to get to God, again, it didn't seem right. It didn't seem like something God would do. By this time, I was reading the Bible, which I didn't do as a Catholic. So I read through the whole Christian Bible, the Tanakh, what we call the Tanakh, plus their scriptures, which is about like another 25% tacked on at the end. I was getting a lot of gaps. At the same time, I wanted to believe. So it wasn't a cold intellectual exercise where I could do this. There was a lot of emotion involved. Because I wanted to believe, I would let certain things slide, hoping that I would understand later. And I never did, so eventually just petered out.
So was it that? How did you then, therefore, make that sort of pivot toward Judaism? I mean, why not a different sect of Christianity or Islam or sort of a non-denominational Christian? Or I mean, there are Daniel, as you know, there are many liberal streams of Christianity today. Even I read a survey from the Pew Forum based in Washington. Many of you are familiar. They do all this religious polling. They said that even the States, as of 3 or 4 years ago, the majority, something like 60% of self-described evangelicals in the United States say that there are many paths to heaven. So I wonder what you think about that. In other words, it's clear that, according to, Catholic faith or evangelical faith, there's one way, but it's clear that as these people start to have, they have a Hindu neighbor and an atheist neighbor and a Jewish colleague and a Muslim friend, all of a sudden it's hard to imagine that these people who are good and holy and religious, and maybe they're not religious, but they're good people, don't deserve all the terrible things. So, how did you seek out sort of all these religions that are sort of more the equivalent of like our reform? In other words, we believe that, Jesus was a teacher, but he wasn't God. I mean, there are movements like that. Did you, United Church, stuff like that? That didn't, you wanted like the real deal? What was the drive there?
No, the things that prevented me from doing that was, first of all, I sincerely believed in God, like our God, and Scripture. So the idea of like trading it in for a Quran was just not going to happen. What I wanted to do is understand our God better and what He wanted from us. I was having a lot of problems with the Christian scriptures, and eventually, my Christianity just died out. So finding another flavor of Christianity just wasn't for me. I didn't want to leave God and go to like Hinduism or Buddhism. I don't even know if Buddhism is technically a religion or not, or whether it's just a philosophy. And that's just, it wasn't in the cards, because I already had a belief in God and in the Scripture, in what they call the Old Testament, and it made sense. If you look at the way the Tanakh is set up, it makes sense. It holds together. And then there's a gap, and then there's Christianity, and all of a sudden you've got to do all these theological gymnastics to try to make things make sense. Like, well, Jesus is God, and He's the Son of God, but He's really not this, and what about that? And you're not supposed to have idols, but the church is for all idols, and just all that stuff. When my Christianity left, there was a lot of peace, because that nonsense was put aside. I said, okay, well, what am I going to do with what I have left? There's God, and He's given us scriptures, and He's told us what to do. And if we lead a good life, things will be fine. And if not, not. And it was while I was in this kind of, my own version of religion, when I was reading a bunch of other things, when I first started picking up books about Judaism, what I was learning about Judaism, which was much more consistent with what I had already figured out. There was God, there's scriptures, He expects us to do things, and if we do things, things will go well, and if not, things won't. And so like I said before, it was finding out that I already had a religion. I just didn't know.
So how long was this sort of no man's land? So
A
to
couple years.
understand, what's
Couple
that?
years. A couple
Couple of
years.
years. So there was a period when you had left sort of formal Christianity,
Mhm.
so to speak, but you still believed in the God of Abraham, so to speak. You
Mhm.
still believed in the Bible, but you just hadn't sort of. So you were, I guess, in a sense, you were de facto a Noahide at that time. Would that be
Yeah,
correct?
I think that would be correct. I hadn't heard of Noahide. I hadn't heard of Noahide until about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. But
Could you
yeah,
explain to people what that is while we mention
okay.
that?
Okay. In the Talmud, in the Masechet Sanhedrin, it says they're the children of Noah. These are the people who follow the 7 Noahide laws. That's a bit of incorrect. We're not talking about 7 laws. We're talking about 7 categories of laws. And if these people, whoever they may be throughout the world, you look at their culture, and if they have, monotheism, they believe in God, and they have courts of justice, and they have laws, and there's no idolatry, and a bunch of other things. And if they have laws against sexual deviation, you can consider them like righteous Gentiles. These are called the children of Noah, B'nai Noah. So Noahide is an anglicization of B'nai Noah, and so lately, in the last, I don't know, 30 years or so, this concept has taken traction among mostly Christians who basically were in my position. They still believed in God, they still believed in scriptures, they just didn't believe in Jesus anymore. And they had a lot of problems with Christianity. And a lot of them are stumbling onto the Noahide movement. The problem with the Noahide movement is it's new. It's basically almost an online thing right now. If they had more congregations and places where people can meet and literally congregate, that would be better. But right now, it's very loose, and it doesn't have any structure. But there are more and more people are leaving Christianity. In other words, people don't have a problem leaving Jesus. They have a problem leaving God because they do believe in God. They just don't believe in Jesus. And for the longest time, most of these people, that was the same thing. And all of a sudden, it's not.
So how did your parents then take your we didn't talk about them, it's this move away from both Catholicism and then away from Christianity in general before you got, and then to a Jew. I mean, were your parents alive? What did they
My
think?
father died when I was young. My father died, I think it was 6 or 7 years old. My father died. My mother, she took it remarkably well. My family, on the whole, took it very, very well. I've heard such horror stories. I know people who have been literally disowned. There's a girl I know, a young lady in Cleveland. Both she and her husband are converts. And her father was not exactly which denomination, it was Pentecostal or Baptist, and he was a very racist kind of guy, white supremacist. So the thought of his sweet daughter becoming a Jew, I don't know if they've ever spoken since then. He just cut her off, and people have been telling me these stories. I was the opposite. My family was very, very good about it. And in the coming up to the breaking of the news, I think what happened was my mother got very upset. Oh my goodness, he owes money to the mafia. He got a girl pregnant. He's gay. So when I finally said I'm Jewish, she was so relieved that, like, is that all that I can handle, My family is very understanding. What actually happened was a little while later, I was talking to my mother, and I said, listen, not that I'm complaining or anything, but I was kind of hoping for a bigger reaction. You took it like really well, like too well. And she said something that completely knocked me out of my chair. She says, well, it's not like you're the first. I says, excuse me? It turns out I'm I think the 3rd person in my family who's converted to Judaism. They're all cousins. I don't know who they are. One's living in Philadelphia. I think one's in Texas. We don't know each other. Each of us is converted. We're now Orthodox. And all on my father's side of the family. Many, many years ago at the village shul, I had the pleasure of meeting Rabbi Toby Singer. And I spoke to him for a little while, and I told him about my background. And he says, you need to do a DNA genetic testing, because especially the fact that you're Italian, there's a substantial likelihood that you have a significant amount of Jewish blood in you. I never did it, but he said, oh, no, you need to do a test, especially for what you're getting from your father's side. I wouldn't be at all surprised if going back several hundred years, whether it was Rome, Venice, Bari, any of these great centers of Jewish learning in years past, that you may have a connection. So yeah, I never did it though. I really should though. But I was very, very lucky with my family.
And did you have siblings as well?
I have a younger sister, 2 years younger than I am. She was also very good about it. And her nieces, everyone's really cool about it. The one thing that happened with one of my nieces, she went like all the rest of us, she went to Catholic school. So she was in Catholic school, either St. Kevin's or Notre Dame or something like that. And they were talking about different religions, and my niece puts her hand up and says, oh, my uncle's Jewish. And she goes, oh, so that means your mother's Jewish? She goes, no. Well, your mother's not Jewish? No. But your father is Jewish? Yes. Are they brothers and sisters? Yes. And so the teacher couldn't figure it out, and eventually my sister had to straighten it out. But yeah, and also just with my name, Ventresca, people get this look on their face like, it's not exactly like, Goldstein or Silverberg or anything like that.
So after you sort of made this transition, what was your relationship like with your former peers? I mean, the people you had sought out counsel and clarification, were you still in touch with them? Did they know? Did they try to bring you back? Were they bewildered? Like, what was their response?
My born again friends, I didn't keep in touch with, but that was more of a result of me moving to Toronto and working in Toronto. I just didn't have contact with any of these people anymore. And my new circle of friends didn't include any born-again Christians. The Jews that I was working with, they were secular. I didn't meet any religious Jews. This is at the time I was learning about Judaism. Once I converted, and when I was married, my wife's family was Jewish, and I just kind of plugged into that.
Wow. And so, I mean, tell me, you said you're up to something like almost 900 videos. I've seen some of them on, you said 900, right? That you've done on YouTube?
860, something like that.
Okay. So, I mean, that's over how long? How many years have you been doing this?
Let me see. I think I've got the date written down here somewhere. Yeah, I started December 6th, 2017.
Oh, wow. So you've done about 900 in about 2.5 years.
Almost one a day.
Wow. And so these are what sort of in terms of the topics, Jewish-Christian polemics?
No, I stay away from that. The analogy I used is one I found particularly apt. I don't argue with Christians anymore for the same reason that I don't play chess with pigeons. They knock over all the pieces, they crap on the board, and then they strut around like they won the game. At the beginning, I would argue with Christians a lot. Because first of all, I was just appalled that this stuff happened. I had no idea the extent of the missionary threat until I started, being interested enough to contact Julius and Rabbi Skobach, and they lifted up the rock for me. But the actual arguing with debating Christians, I don't do that anymore. If a Christian is genuinely interested, I will talk until the cows come home. And there was this young lady who was in Asheville, North Carolina. And she was genuinely interested, and we asked questions. We had these long conversations. And at one point she says, I'm going to have to stop this. I says, okay, I'm not going to push anything on you. Why? She says, I know where this conversation is going. And if this conversation continues, I'm going to lose my faith in Jesus. And I can't lose my faith in Jesus. I can't, I'm not like you. I can't leave everything I believe in and then go off. This is my parents were ministers. All my friends are Christians. I can't do that. I can't do that. We've got to stop. And but in terms of the channel, the reason it came about was Rav Dror Moshe Gazuto, a Breslover guy from Israel. He came to me and a friend of mine, and he urged us to make videos. My friend Yochanan, who's from Nicaragua, Rav Dror asked him to make Spanish language videos because he says in Latin America there's a real spiritual awakening. There's a lot of people who are seeking the truth, and I want you to make Spanish language videos directed at these people. Then he came to me and he says, you know, there's a lot of people in North America and in Europe and in Australia and New Zealand, and they're stumbling around in the darkness. They're seeking the truth, but they're just bumping around in the dark. And he said to me, you come from that darkness. You can speak to them in a way that, you know, yeshiva guys and rabbis can't. People who are from birth, they can't. You were in that place. You found your way out. Talk to them and help them, which I did, and I haven't stopped.
Wow. So tell us about, you know, listen, we're almost at 9 o'clock already, but maybe you could tell us one or two stories of particularly, I imagine, you know, when you're putting stuff on YouTube, you have some, Rabbi Skolbat, certainly from Jews for Judaism, I've always found him to be one of the most interesting people out there because he tells me, you know, all these incredible, he puts a video out there and the stories he has of people reaching out to him are remarkable. Can you maybe tell us one or two stories of the people who've seen your videos and, you know, who they are and how it's impacted them?
There's this one person who reached out to me, I think through Facebook, and it says, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I've been watching your videos and they're very interesting and they really speak to me. I says, oh, that's very nice. He says, and the person said, in my background, I was very involved with pagan movements, and now I happen to know many witches, because a lot of people in the witch community reach out to me because I'm not judgmental. They expect most Christian Jews and Muslims to be very anti this, and I'm a little open, and they come to me for religious advice. They don't go to their people, they come to me. So this person comes to me and I says, okay, what branch? And he says, well, the Norse gods and the Germanic sort of thing, and there was a little bit of like white supremacy, and I says, okay, so what's happening? And the person said, I'm starting to leave, but I've got a lot of friends and they're not happy with me because they're seeing it as a betrayal, but I have to do what I do. I says, listen, I'll help you however you want. If you want me to help you understand things, if you want me to give you a little encouragement, whatever, I'll do whatever I can. So a lot of people, I mentioned witches. There are 7 or 8 people who are still involved in witchcraft who come to me for religious advice because for some reason there isn't someone they trust for theological questions. And they come to me saying, what about this and what about that? And I don't encourage them in their witchcraft, and they're looking for honest answers. I give them honest answers in a way that they can understand it, because given their backgrounds, they have a real hard set image of what Christians are. And to them, Jews are like a subset of Christianity because God is this big guy and this old guy with a big long beard who kills people whenever he's angry. That's their concept of God. But they're reaching out for divinity. They want something divine, something holy. I know they're reaching out to Hashem. They don't know it. But if I put it in that terms, it'll scare them away. So I'm kind of just gently nudging them toward something that's a little more real. They're very sweet people. I wish, there's a couple of things they can teach Jews about. These people are good, religious people. They're just wrong, and they need a little nudge. They're not that far off. They're really not.
So, tell me, I mean, perhaps we'll wrap up with this, but, you're speaking, I think, to an audience, and again, it's being recorded, we'll put it on YouTube and so on. I think of, some people who are Jews by choice and others who were, I mean, everybody, I think, practically speaking, in an assimilated society today, we're all Jews by choice because it's very easy to fall off and walk away. And I think the default is to let it slip, and we have to go out of our way to become Jewishly involved. But what do you think, in your experience, having just sort of, growing up as a Catholic, moving to the evangelical movement, converting conservative, converting Orthodox again, or I skipped also a 2-year intermediate period where you were sort of in no man's land, a Noahide. What would you say is one or two of the biggest sort of inheritances, so to speak, of Yiddishkeit, of the Torah, of the legacy from that God has given us, that you think, in your experience, having been around, that sometimes perhaps is, I should say, not fully appreciated by Jews, but you think that perhaps we should focus more on?
I think one of the things that a lot of standard, regular issue Jews all your life Jews sometimes miss is how close and how powerful a connection you can have with Hashem. To a lot of people, Judaism is something you do. You go to Shul, you do your prayers, you put on talis, you tefillin, you eat matzahs and Passover, but there seems to be a disconnect between all of this and Hashem. And these people, they're missing a very important connection. I think it was Rabbi Skobach, I forget who he was quoting. He says, in a big city like New York and Chicago and Toronto, you can have challahs for Shabbos, you can get kosher food for Shabbos, you can get candles for Shabbos and Sidurim for Shabbos. Where do you get Shabbos for Shabbos? And this is, I think, what some people are missing. There's you can going through the moves and saying the words, but I think that there may be a disconnect between this and God. And if there's one thing I wish I could help and fix, it's that. A lot of people, when I talk to them about Husbodus, speaking to God as if you would speak to a close personal friend, I'm disheartened by how many times I've asked the person, have you ever spoken to God? I said, no, I do my sitter, I do the thing. Yeah. Have you ever talked to God? You ever fiddle on the roof, tell you how he talks to God? You ever do that? No. And again, it's that connection, that close connection. Like God is a close personal friend. He wants to hear from you. He really does. He knows what you're thinking. He likes to hear the words.
Wow. That's very powerful. Rabbi Rothman, maybe we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
I'm not really sure what to ask because, we've covered quite a bit, but perhaps the one thing that I was wondering about is that, when you received your answer from your parish priest or your head of your school, and he spoke to you as an adult, even though you were a child and you didn't really understand it. Now you're an adult. Now can you look back and understand what he had to say to you? And if so,
I don't remember what he said to me, but I know enough about the institution of Catholicism and its tenets that I can have a pretty good guess of what he was saying as a Monsignor, as a Jesuit, and the need for the institution of Catholicism and for the sacraments and how it's important to have the connection with God because the church is your intermediary between yourself and God, and you've got to go through the church, and you have to trust the church as an institution, and we're not just here for fun, we're here to help you, but that I learned later as an adult. Like if you just go to a bookstore and pick up a copy of the Catholic Catechism, don't do it. But just if you do, it basically sets out, this is the church, this is what we do, this is what we believe. The Catechism, and if you go through that, it's enlightening, and some of it's a little disturbing. But yeah, I can probably, although I don't actively remember anything he says because it was gibberish, but I can probably guess what he was saying to me.
Yeah, I see. So it's I know that we mentioned before a bit about my background, and I grew up with a lot of Italian people who were Catholics, And I later got to know a lot of Protestant people, be it born again or not. And one of the big differences that I saw then, and I see now with when people are converting, because we have a very high percentage of converts in our shul, and the Basin sends a lot of them to us because we have a very open membership. We're very open to all kinds of people. So it's like the United Nations.
Thank God.
Yeah, and it's something I'm proud of. But one thing that I saw was that in general, Catholics do not know the Bible. They don't read the Bible. It's the priest who reads the Bible and interprets it. And that was one of the bases of the protest of the Protestants, was that they learned it. So like we have a few people who are in our community who were Protestants, and they can run circles around me when it comes to understanding Tanakh.
Yeah,
they will quote it in English, but much faster than I will.
This is something a lot of people don't understand. And as a Catholic, certainly in the early 60s, and probably until now, Catholics are discouraged from reading the Bible. And as I said before, when I did a presentation, I have a certain degree of sympathy for this, because when you read scripture, like you would reading the book, it could be very misleading. Scripture is something you need to be taught. You can't just pick it up like a book. Born-again Christians, they pick it up, they read it like a book. And they can have some pretty wacky ideas because it's not something you're taught. In Yiddishkeit, you're taught, okay, this pasuk reads this, it means this, and in this chapter we're doing this, and it's something you're taught. And yeah, so when you ask a Christian, about the Bible, unless it was talked about in church, they won't know. It wasn't until my late teens, when I became a born-again Christian, that I actually picked up a Bible and read it for the first time in my life.
Yeah, it's a radical.
Now, what's happening with the church now, I don't know. But in those days, certainly in the early 60s, you were discouraged from reading the Bible.
Yeah, I think we're pretty close to the same age. And when I was growing up, it was I would say something from the Torah in English, and they would have no idea what I was speaking about, even though it was an explicit statement. It wasn't like I was interpreting matzah. It was literally, straight out of the words. And I found that shocking as a child. But then when I got to know the Protestants, I could see the difference, that they didn't necessarily understand what they were reading, but they knew it. They didn't necessarily know what it meant. Right?
What surprised me about Yiddishkeit is, and again, it's something I talked to in the seminar, I was blown away by how few Jews have read the Tanakh. And I don't mean the Chumash, the entire Tanakh, cover to cover, every book, every chapter, every sentence, every word. One or two. The amount of yeshiva guys who've never read the Tanakh is baffling to me. Mm-hmm. One joke I heard, some guy a yeshiva student was reading through a Tanakh, and a friend comes by and says, "What's that?" He says, "I don't know, but it's got some great quotes from the Talmud."
Yeah, I have a good friend, Mordechai Becher, and he will once in a while quote something from Tanakh and then say, for yeshiva guys, that's the prophets.
Well, this is the whole thing. I've heard this from a couple of rabbis. When one of the yeshiva guys is quoting from the Tanakh, they don't quote from the Tanakh. They quote from the Mishnah or the Gemara that's making reference to the Tanakh. Yeah. Again, that's one of the things that surprises me.
Well, I think it has to do with the mode of education, because when they get to be about grade 4, they stop learning Chumash for the most part and start learning Talmud, which is for the rest of their life. And unless you have somebody who has a personal interest or is scholarly, he very well may never read it. It's like you said.
This is a warning. This is a warning I give to yeshiva guys a lot, because they're in yeshiva, they think they know everything. Oh, well, if I go against one of these, Jews for Jesus type, I'll run circles around you. I said, don't you dare. They will eat you alive. Yeah. They will know sections of Divrei Yamim and Chronicles that you've never even heard of. They've memorized pages you've never even read. They will eat you alive. Stay away.
Yeah, with their own translation as well.
Well, not only that, it's just that they'll quote entire sections from the second book of Kings, talking about Moshiach. These guys have never heard of.
Right. Yeah, no question. I agree. All right, Rob, he's answered my questions.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'll just wrap up maybe with that thought. It's interesting. I perhaps for another time, but my own experience. I first met Daniel 2 years ago, I think, in a Jews for Judaism evening. I spoke for half an hour, and he spoke. And my own experience as somebody who grew up as a Jew. My father is not Jewish. You mentioned the last name Ventresca. Mine is Walker, right? So same thing. I grew up in a assimilated Jewish family, and in my early 20s, I embraced Messianic Judaism or Christianity because while still growing in Judaism, putting on tefillin every day and davening every day and still embracing that. It was Rabbi Skobach and a lot of these YouTube videos which brought me back. But it was these same arguments which you sort of don't expect it. And then on the superficial level, you're a lawyer, Daniel, my understanding. So prima facie, on the face of it, a lot of these arguments that the Christians, they can point to this proof text and this proof text. And if you don't know anything about Isaiah such and such or Jeremiah such and such, you're overwhelmed. I remember when I was a kid in downtown, I went to University of Ottawa, and not I was a kid, I was in university, and there's a big sign from, not sign, almost a, I don't know, near the Parliament Hill, not near Parliament Hill, near the Supreme Court. It's a quote from Ecclesiastes, Koheles. And I remember as a kid, or not as a kid, in my 17 years old, driving and saying, "Oh, look at this. It's not inclusive. It's a sign from some Christian Bible." And then later, my own shock, saying, "Oh, that's our Bible, right?" It's the profound, I think, embarrassment was that we don't know it as well as we should, and as well as others. And I think that unfortunately leaves many of our more vulnerable, particularly people from the former Soviet Union and Israel, quite vulnerable to that. And so, it's good. Listen, obviously, we do not know our own heritage for sure.
2,700 years ago, the prophet Hosea said, "My people are dying of ignorance." And sadly, not a lot has changed in 2,700 years.
Yeah. Well, that's our mission, is to try to help educate Jews.
Thank God for Aish that is doing outreach and stuff like that, and Or Sameach and Chabad and people who are reaching out and adult education. Thank God 1,000 times for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you certainly on behalf of the Aish Thornhill Community Shul and Rabbi Rothman, myself, and everyone who's joined. Thank you so much for joining us. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, how can they go about doing that?
Probably the best thing to do is Facebook. Look up my name and pick the guy who looks like me. I actually have a picture that looks like me, so it shouldn't be hard.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and we will, like I said, hopefully send out this recording in the coming days. Have a lovely evening. Thank you again, Daniel.
And thank you very much.
Thanks.